Welcome everyone to Zoom into Books this afternoon. We have multi-award-winning author Joe Burcat with guest interviewer Burke Allen. And we do have some good news for Joe Burcat today. Reader's Favorite just announced their awards, and The Strange Fire won a gold medal for Best Environmental Fiction. So that is our news of the day today. So congratulations, Joel and Burke, take it away.
Hey there, thank you so much for joining us today on the Big Time Talker podcast brought to you by SpeakerMatch.com. Today, it's a simulcast with our friends from Headline Books and their Zoom into Books program, where they give us the opportunity to talk to award-winning authors. And we've got one today, a reader's favorite gold medal award winner for his latest environmental legal thriller, Strange Fire. It's the third in his Mike Jacobs series. If you love legal thrillers, you're going to love this conversation. My buddy Joel Burcat joins us today from his palatial estate somewhere in central Pennsylvania. Mr. Burcat, congratulations on that win.
Thank you. And I have to say that Kathy really kept that close to her vest, because till she said it a minute ago, I didn't know that I'd won the gold medal in that contest. And it's a prestigious award, and I'm pretty happy about that and surprised. So we're all surprised simultaneously and happily surprised. So thank you.
I love that. Kathy Tietz, the publisher of Headline Books, keeps it under wraps until just before the broadcast. Gold medal award winner for the reader's favorite. And the book is Strange Fire. It's the third in a trilogy about this young, ambitious attorney, Mike Jacobs, who likes to right wrongs in the environmental world. And you've been writing these books for a while. Does the character of Mike Jacobs change during the span of the books, from when you wrote the first one, Drink to Every Beast, to this new one, Strange Fire?
Let's say Mike evolves. Mike grows up, as all of us have done. And, you know, Mike's at an interesting point in his life. We start out with Mike right after he's joined Pennsylvania DEP as a 25-year-old lawyer. And we follow him through the three books. And by Strange Fire, he's now 29. So he's grown both as a human and also as a lawyer. So he doesn't change drastically, but he grows. And that's something that's part of what we authors like to call the arc of the story.
DEP is what, for folks who are going, what does that mean? DEP.
DEP is the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and my DEP is a fictional DEP. And just like when James Patterson is writing a book about the District of Columbia Police Department, or the Metropolitan Police Force, as it's sometimes called, or as Thomas Harris writes about the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or Mike or Connolly writes about the LAPD. They're all fictional versions of a real organization. So mine also is a fictional version of DEP. There's enough there that if you know Pennsylvania DEP, you would say, oh, okay, I think I know what he's getting at. But it is a fictional version.
If you're a fan of legal thrillers, there's a great opportunity this weekend to pick up the Mike Jacobs books from the publisher. And I want to make sure I get this right. It's 99 cents for each of those ebooks from Amazon.com through September 7th. Is that right, Joel?
That's right. Just this weekend for Labor Day, if somebody's looking for something to read, well, they can pick up any one of these three books here, the e-version of it. And they're all 99 cents each. We've never done this before, so this is the very first time they've ever been run on a 99-cent special. The easiest way to do it would be to go to Amazon and buy the book off of Amazon or Kindle, which is also part of Amazon, and get the book through them. But it's just 99 cents a piece.
For folks who have not read your books before and may not be familiar with you as an author, you're writing about a young author, Mike Jacobs, a young Jewish author, Mike Jacobs, who does environmental law. Lawyer, correct.
A lawyer.
You were that guy at one point in your life.
Well, you know, I'm not Mike and Mike's not me, but let me just say this. Mike went to Penn State, so did I, so check. Mike went to Vermont Law School, so did I, check. I worked for Pennsylvania's predecessor agency called the Department of Environmental Resources, and Mike works for DEP, so check there as well. And Mike's Jewish and I'm Jewish, check there. The way I've drafted Mike is, now understand I'm a little bit older than 29 now, but Mike is about my physique when I was in my mid and late 20s, so check again on that. But Mike is distinct from me, but there's certainly some of my DNA in Mike. There's no doubt about that. But there's also DNA of other people, people that I've admired and people that I've looked at over the years, people that I've known over the years. And so Mike is an amalgam of a number of different folks. But I have to say that there's a fair amount of me in Mike as well, and vice versa.
These books are fast moving. There's a lot of action, there's some romance. And I wonder, since you're not Mike, clearly, there are some similarities. Specifically as an author, how do you draw on what you remember in that background doing environmental law and make it exciting and interesting so it becomes a page turner in these books?
Well, as environmental lawyers know, the practice of environmental law on a day-to-day basis is not as exciting as Mike Jacobs' practice of environmental law. And when environmental lawyers spend an awful lot of time reviewing environmental regulations and reviewing environmental laws and interpreting them, writing memos, and even getting ready for a trial, which seems like it might be exciting. And in fact, the trial part itself can be exciting. But to get ready for that trial that might take place over an 8 or 16-hour period, basically 1 or 2 days, you might spend hundreds of hours getting ready for that trial. And those hours are, for the most part, not particularly exciting. So what I do with my environmental legal thrillers is the same thing that they do on television. When you see a police drama and the crime occurs in the first 2 minutes of the police drama, and they're all going out for a beer at the end of it after they've solved the crime, and a whole several years worth of an investigation and all the rest of that may be compressed into less than an hour's time. And it's kind of the same thing with my writing, is that I'm required, really, for the sake of the audience and for the sake of myself, to compress things. So I try to make it clear that there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of time that takes place, that's a lot of work that takes place that would be dreadfully boring if you wanted to read about it. But I focus in on the more exciting parts and the more interesting parts. So environmental law itself has got a lot of interesting things going on. We work with very, very interesting laws. We work with interesting scenarios, and we work with interesting people. But at the same time, there's an awful lot that's just the day-to-day stuff, like in any other job, that's just not all that exciting. And so I try to compress that all into a readable book that is, usually under 350 words is my goal. 350 pages, I should say, which is my goal.
Joel Burcat is our guest today on the Big Time Talker podcast and Zoom into Books. His Mike Jacobs trilogy, Drink to Every Beast Amid Rage and Strange Fire, are in fact page turners. And if you love legal thrillers, these are interesting. I wonder, there you are in central Pennsylvania. You write a book about toxic waste being dumped. You write a book about, the coal mining industry and all the stuff that does to the environment. Strange Fire has to do with fracking and natural gas. Is it just a big toxic wasteland where you are?
No, actually, central Pennsylvania is a very beautiful area, as is most of Pennsylvania. There are, places in Pennsylvania that are just, the best word for it would be sublime. And one of the things that you learn is that you take an area that is a gorgeous, beautiful place, and you bring industry to it, and the things that happen so far as industry is concerned is not necessarily all that nice. It's not pretty, but one thing that you learn in the practice of environmental law is that things can be done the right way and things can be done the wrong way. And sometimes even when things are done the right way, it just doesn't look all that nice. The fact of the matter is using fracking as an example, you can do hydraulic fracturing, as the industry would call it. You can do hydraulic fracturing and do it totally the correct way. It's just not going to look all that nice and pretty as it may have looked, as the area may have looked when it was just a farmer's field.
Right.
But Central PA is a gorgeous place. In my first book, Drink to Every Beast, it really starts out with this idyllic setting, these two teenagers canoeing down the Susquehanna River, and then they come in contact with hazardous waste that was dumped into an old abandoned mine workings, and it's coming out of a mine tunnel. And this is based on a real place called the Butler Mine Tunnel, where at one time it was the outflow from underground mines up near Pittston, Pennsylvania, on the Susquehanna River. And what happened over time, what happened until fairly recently, was that let's call them bad guys, were dumping hazardous waste down into boreholes that went down into the mine workings, and it was coming out. And in fact, it created a gigantic Superfund site, a hazardous waste site that took from the 1970s until recently, within the past year, to clean up. So you have these beautiful locations, and it can also have, these very, very toxic things going on around it. So, and that's a real contrast. It's one of the things I do try to contrast in my stories, is the fact that on the one hand, you've got this great beauty. On the other hand, you have industry, and you have both legal industry and illegal industry that might be taking place. And I'm trying to contrast those things in my stories and trying to bring it home to people, because most people don't go to the Butler Mine Tunnel. Most people don't go inside of a coal strip mine. Most people don't go to a fracking site. I've been to those places. I've spent a fair amount of time at those places. And just like when you read a book about, the Rocky Mountains, or you read a book about, some island somewhere, you want to be transported to that place. You want to know what that place is like. And that's one of the things that I try to do, is transport my readers to these places so that they can experience for themselves what it's like.
In your books, Mike Jacobs tends to be the guy that goes after industry. When you were an environmental lawyer, did you ever argue on the side of the company?
Oh, sure, of course. Now, when I started out as a young environmental lawyer at the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Resources, we were representing the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, as we call it here. And as a lawyer for the Commonwealth, representing the Commonwealth's interest, which often is aligned with the environmental side of things, but sometimes isn't entirely aligned with the environmental side of things. So, for example, if a permit is issued by the Pennsylvania DEP, let's say to do strip mining in a particular area, that permit then becomes the subject of an appeal, which may be filed by a group of neighbors or filed by an organization, the Riverkeeper, the Sierra Club, some other organization like that. So even as a lawyer working for the state or working for US EPA, you may find yourself on what some people would consider the wrong side of the case. But what you're doing is you're trying to uphold the law as a lawyer working either for DEP or for EPA or for the Department of Justice. And like I said, that may not be what most people would consider to be the environmental side of the case. In private practice, probably the vast majority of my clients were industry. And one of the things that you try to do when you're working with your clients is to make sure that they abide by the law. I mean, the clients are coming to you as a lawyer and asking you to help them to comply with the law. One of the things that really only a small number of people would be intimately aware of is the fact that the environmental laws are very, very complicated. And in order to do things the right way and not run afoul of the law, companies come to environmental lawyers all the time and ask for our advice so that they can, so that they don't end up violating the law. They don't end up getting penalized. They don't end up getting their permits pulled. So yes, in private practice, for the most part, environmental lawyers are representing industry. Now, I also represented some environmental groups when I was in private practice, and many environmental lawyers that I know also represent environmental groups. And some lawyers, I'm going to say a tiny, tiny percent of environmental lawyers are working entirely on the side of environmental organizations. But that, you could number those people in the dozens, really, in a state like Pennsylvania. And the vast majority of environmental lawyers are working in private industry, or quite a few working for the Commonwealth.
Joel Burcat is our guest today on the Big Time Talker podcast. He takes what he knows, his work, his life's work as an environmental lawyer, and pours it into the character Mike Jacobs in his books, Drink to Every Beast, A Mid-Range, and Strange Fire. Strange Fire is the newest of the 3 books in the trilogy, and just learned today that it won a Reader's Favorite Gold Medal Award. As an environmental lawyer, and somebody who knows this way better than most of us, companies sometimes are cast as the villain in these stories. But it sounds to me like, from what you're telling me, that lots of times the companies may not necessarily know where the line is drawn when it comes to how to dispose of hazardous waste, or exactly what to do to keep themselves environmentally in line. Would you say, in the real world, as opposed to the fictional world of Mike Jacobs in your books, in the real world, are they bad guys, or are they trying to get it done and put food on the table for their own families and trying to color inside the lines?
No, without any doubt, 99.9% of the people in environmentally impactful industries, 99.9% of the time, they're trying to get it right. They really do want to comply with the laws. Like I said before, the environmental laws are very complicated.
Yeah.
They require a lot of interpretation to be able to understand what it is that a company must do. And typically there are a number of different environmental consultants and environmental specialists who are working to assist a company. And again, it would depend on how complicated the situation is. On something relatively simple, like let's say development near a wetland. So you're not allowed to put most development in wetlands. That's illegal to do that under a number of different state laws. But you need a biologist, you might a botanist, you might need a geologist, you would need all of those specialties. And the company would either employ them directly or would contract for services for that. Each company has a health and environmental and a safety specialist who focuses on environmental issues for the company. Again, keep them in compliance. And then they would also likely retain an environmental lawyer to help them interpret the laws and to work with the other consultants to make sure that whatever activity it is that they're doing is complying with the law. So again, if you're looking at, I'm going to say a relatively simple thing such as development near a wetland, that might have involved in it easily 3 or 4 consultants and specialists, even more depending upon how complicated that is. And that's a relatively simple thing. And I'm going to say one thing I've seen over the years is that very often there's a huge difference of opinion. When you bring in the EPA, you bring in the Army Corps of Engineers, you bring in Pennsylvania DEP, they may have a different view of things than the consultants. And I've seen battles between the consultants and the agencies where the agencies say, no, you drew the line in place, and the consultants saying, no, you're wrong, you're being overly aggressive in terms of your interpretation. And so it can end up being a pretty big battle. But keep in mind, the companies really don't prosper by violating the law. It seems, I don't know, maybe counterintuitive to people who don't work in this area, but the fact of the matter is that the companies may end up paying gigantic penalties. They may find that their development, whatever it is that they're doing, has to be pulled out of the ground, and they've got to restore the area, and they've got to bring it back to the way it was beforehand. And there may be civil fines involved in that. There may be criminal fines. In Pennsylvania, we have a very aggressive attorney general, and he's gone after a number of companies that have had environmental violations. And nobody wants to be the recipient of a grand jury indictment. Nobody wants to potentially go to jail for violating environmental laws. So, like I said, most companies, the vast majority of them, do want to comply. There often are differences of opinion between what the agencies say and what the consultants say. And then the other thing too is that most companies are not interested in paying hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of civil penalties or the prospect of criminal violations. So the fact of the matter is, my experience is that the vast majority of the companies do want to comply, and there are differences of opinions between all of these consultants and technical people.
Tough to keep it all straight. That's why we got guys like Joel Burcat around, the environmental lawyer who writes legal thrillers that focus on the environment. And there's a trilogy of them: Drink to Every Beast, A Mid-Rage, and the latest, Strange Fire, a gold medal award winner from readers' favorite. Pick them up from Headline Books, the publisher, online at Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. Did you feel when you were writing these books any sort of moral obligation to get the word out on these bad things that are happening in the environment and how it impacts the climate? Or at the end of the day, are you just trying to write a good book that people want to take to the beach and read and enjoy? Where does that come from internally for you? Where do you fall on all that?
A little of both, Burke.
Okay.
And
right.
you always manage to find, the space between the two big blocks, and that's one of those spaces. So yes, on the one hand, I want people to know about what's really going on, out in the world in terms of these environmental issues. I want to try to present that in a way that's understandable to people. For the most part, in a lot of these cases, whether it's coal mining or whether it's hydraulic fracturing or fracking, there are people on both sides who have, goodwill and good intentions, and believe very strongly in the things that they're doing, believe that what they're doing is exactly the right thing to be doing. I know many people who are involved in the energy industry who believe that, but for what they're doing, we'd all be sitting in the dark and and lighting bonfires to keep ourselves amused at night. And I know many people in the environmental world who believe that we really need to focus on renewables and to get away from fossil fuels. And I have my personal opinions regarding those issues, but the fact of the matter is, you can't say that one is inherently right and the other one is inherently wrong or evil. And what I particularly try to do in both Mid-Rage and Strange Fire is to present both of those sides. Now, in my first book, Drink to Every Beast, what happens in Drink to Every Beast is inherently evil. That's illegal dumping of hazardous waste into a river. That's just wrong and criminal. But in a Mid-Rage, I try to present both sides of the coal mining issue. Although the one coal mine operator is kind of psychotic, but I do have a lot of characters in that story. People who work for the department who are very strong believers in coal mining, some of the lawyers who represent the coal industry who believe very strongly in the correctness of what's going on. And I have people on the other side, the neighbors, environmental groups and the like, people who believe the opposite. So I try to present all of that. And the same thing in Strange Fire. I have people who believe strongly that fracking is absolutely the most evil thing that there ever was, and then people who believe that it's one of the things that's keeping us warm at night and providing electricity for us during the year round. And they believe very strongly that it's the right thing to do. So I try to present both sides. And the other thing I try to do is I really do try to educate my audience. And that's something that I've worked very hard on. The hard thing is to do it in a way that doesn't bore the reader. I want readers to understand the science of what's going on, but to do it in a way that is interesting. So my best example would be a Tom Clancy novel.
Right.
Tom Clancy, the great thriller writer, took something that could have been so inherently boring. How does the nuclear submarine work? If you look at the nitty-gritty details of how a nuclear submarine works, you probably couldn't find something more boring than that, or sonar, or radar, or these other things. It's physics, it's science, it's engineering, and those are very inherently boring things. But he wrote his novel in such a way that he educated people. You read The Hunt for Red October, for example, and you're going to learn a lot about engineering and about all of those different activities. And guess what? He sold almost 5 million copies of that book and still selling. And they made a well-known and highly regarded movie, The Hunt for Red October, and it's been unbelievably popular. So it can be done. You look at other writers, Jurassic Park. You look at
Michael Crichton. Yeah.
Michael Crichton, who wrote that, and Michael Crichton, who wrote a number of other books about incorporating medicine into his stories. Again, the technical details of some of these medical issues, but done in a way that it entertained people. But when you were done reading the book, not only were you entertained, but you learned something as a result of that. Other great writers, Patterson does this all the time in his stories, and so many other writers do the same thing as well, trying to educate their readers in addition to entertaining them. And that, if I have to say, that's probably the thing that I feel is maybe the most difficult thing to do, is to take a complicated subject and to make it interesting, and not preach down to people, but to try to present it in a way that it's like the best teacher you ever had. We all had that person, whether it was in high school or college. We all had that person, that extraordinary teacher, that extraordinary professor, who you just looked forward to that class because that teacher was just the best one you ever had, and he or she just made whatever the subject was just come alive for you. And that's what I'm trying to do in my stories as well, is to make the scientific and the engineering parts come alive for the readers.
You have a great chance to check out Joel Burcat's Mike Jacobs Environmental Legal Thrillers. Through September 7th, Joel's publisher, Headline Books, has made each of them available for 99 cents as an ebook. 99 cents through September 7th. So you can pick up a Labor Day read or three. Drink to Every Beast, A Mid-Rage, and Strange Fire, all available, 99 cents each at Amazon.com as an ebook, courtesy of Headline Books. I wonder, growing up in, as you know, Joel, in the coal mining town in the mountains of West Virginia, what's your take on the objectivity of Department of Environmental Protection people? How do you know that when they roll in that they're not, so far, to the left that they, as you said earlier, think inherently all coal mining is evil, and no matter how good a job the mines do, the IMSHA inspector is just going to shut them down. So what about objectivity in these governmental agencies? What did you see as a lawyer there?
Well, understand, I worked in environmental law for over 40 years, and I saw the agency transform over time. And mining is a really good example of how the agency transformed. So that when I started working, actually my first work that I did for Pennsylvania DER when I was there in 1980 was in the mining program, the surface mining program. And at that time, the vast majority of people who worked for Pennsylvania DER in the mining program were actually former miners themselves. People who had worked in the mining industry for 10, 20, 30 years and then went to work for the agency. So almost all of those people had a very strong pro-industry bias. But you know what? They were the same as the cop on the beat. And my experience with most of them was that even though they came from industry, even though they knew the industry inside out, they were the cop. They were the law, and they recognized that adherence with the law was the thing that made sort of leveled the playing field. So that if you had some companies that, as most companies did, that were trying to comply with the law, it was very unfair to these companies that set the bar up here and the bar was complying with the law. Very unfair if you had other companies that were down here not complying with the law, because they might have been saving a few bucks by not complying with the law. So those old time mine inspectors and old time permit people and district mining managers, they were they really looked at themselves, like the cop on the beat, and their job was to enforce the law. Over time, how the agency has changed is that today you probably have relatively few people who came out of industry, and most of them now have degrees in environmental science. So they may have gone to college at West Virginia University or at Penn State University or Lehigh or some other school like that, and gotten themselves degrees in environmental science and biology, in in any one of the environmental fields, and now they're working for the agency. And while their inherent bias may in fact be different, they may be more environmentally conscious. The reality of it is they still look at themselves as the cop on the beat, and they still look at their job as enforcing the law. And I'm going to say that 99% of them recognize that the laws are very complicated and that at times companies are not going to be able to comply with all of the laws, but that it's very important for the bar to be the same for everybody, and that not any company, gets a financial benefit by not complying with the law, because if they don't comply with the law, then they're going to be able to do things more economically, perhaps, than a company that does comply with the law. So their job is to enforce the law, and they really do look at themselves as the cop on the beat. So I don't believe, after having worked with the agency and seen it change over 40 years, I never believed anybody who said, "Oh, the agency's against industry." It's just not the case. The agency is trying to enforce the laws, and that's what they do. And I'll stand up with anybody who believes otherwise. And it's like anything else. You can always find a person who isn't like that, but certainly the agency does not look at themselves as out there to kill an industry. They're there to regulate the industry and to make sure that the playing field is a level playing field for all companies.
We're talking environmental law and environmental legal thrillers with award-winning author Joel Burcat. Strange Fire, Mid-Rage, and Drink to Every Beast are his trilogy of books that have the Mike Jacobs character, perhaps loosely based on a young Joel Burcat. Joel is an award-winning author, Next Generation Indie Book Award winner, and we just learned today a gold medal winner for his latest book from readers' favorite, Strange Fire. So pick that one up. Pick up all three and check them out. At the end of August, Joel, in Jackson, Mississippi, there was a horrible water crisis. There's no water that you can drink or shower or bathe in. You hear these stories and other environmental issues, and you especially, I would imagine, because it's your life's work, are acutely attuned to them. And yet clean water and clean air and things that you would think there would be no argument over have become this political lightning rod where people fight like crazy about things that one generation ago would probably have never thought would come to this. Why is it? Why has the environment become so politically charged?
I don't know the answer to that question. I have some thoughts, and I'll talk about them. I do know that you talk about the Jackson, Mississippi situation. That's actually been going on for a long time, and it's just gotten worse and worse, and it's now coming to the public's attention. And other situations like Flint, Michigan, for example, a criminal situation where people in Flint, Michigan allowed the water supply to become contaminated, and Jackson, Mississippi, where the water supply has just deteriorated so much that it's not drinkable or even usable. Part of the problem so far as infrastructure is concerned is the huge cost of infrastructure. I was involved in working with a municipality in Pennsylvania, and they had an aging wastewater treatment plant, and they had to fix it. They were under a consent order and agreement from Pennsylvania DEP to fix it. The problem was the number of people who lived in that community had declined over the years. And so it was not in a great part of Pennsylvania. I was talking earlier with you about, the wonderful and glorious and pristine areas of Pennsylvania, which is much of the state, if not most of the state. But this was not one of those pristine areas. This was an area in the middle of a vast area of strip mining, and they had seen their population decline precipitously over the years. So there are fewer and fewer people to fuel the tax base, and fewer people using water and the sewage facilities. But the cost of fixing that facility never went down. It still cost, if I remember correctly, it was still $25 million to fix the facility. They looked into buying a new facility. In other words, just scrapping that old facility and putting in a brand new one. The cost, $25 million. And this is in a community where they didn't have $25 million. And I remember talking to the guy who was the regional director for DEP at the time and talking with him about this. And he said, Joel, do you know how many of these facilities I have right now this is the northeastern part of PA. He said, I've got dozens of facilities like this in small communities where the facility was built in the 1970s, and now it's 25, 30, 40, 50 years later, and the population has declined, but the people still using the facility are causing it to contaminate the streams. Or, drinking water. Drinking water is a huge issue. Nobody wants to drink polluted water. And these should not be political issues. Part of the problem is that they're economic issues. And I think that, when you talk about a facility, this is probably already 5 years ago, that 5 years ago was going to cost $25 million to either fix or replace. Today, it might be $30 million, given the changes in, inflation and other factors. And the question is, where's that money going to come from? It's not going to come from the people who live in that community. The ones who stayed are not wealthy individuals. It's a very poor and rural part of Pennsylvania. And bear in mind what that district manager told me was he had dozens of facilities just like that. So part of the problem is money, and nobody wants to be disposing of sewage into a stream that's contaminated. Nobody wants to be drinking water that's contaminated. Now, why is it that these issues have become so politicized? I'm not sure. When you look back, and a good marking point is Earth Day. And Earth Day took place in 1972, I believe it was. And at Philadelphia's Earth Day celebration, one of the speakers was the Republican senator from Pennsylvania. And the same thing in New York City. One of the speakers was the Republican senator from New York State. So you had, both Republicans and Democrats who both, showed up at these events to support protection of the earth, to support, conservation. And I think that there's another thing going on, and that has to do with the question of so-called overregulation. So I think that there are people who believe that industry would be much better off if there was much less regulation of those industries. The problem is that, do you want to be the guy who gets his drinking water somewhere below, that sewage treatment facility that's not working properly because we loosened up the regulations, and now they're permitted to dump a lot more whatever into the stream? You don't want to be in that community that's accepting water from that stream that is contaminated. Likewise, if you're living in rural Pennsylvania near a strip mine, you don't want to be in a situation where your streams are contaminated because we've loosened up the regulations. You don't want to be downwind from a power plant that now can emit a lot more into the environment than it used to be able to emit because we've loosened up the regulations. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me, because I can't imagine that people would want that. But it has become a political issue. It seems like, at some level, it seems like I don't know, like it ought to be logical that if we're holding back industry, and the way to unleash industry is to loosen up these regulations, it seems like there's something commonsensical about that, till you think about the next step. And that is, if you're the guy downwind, you're the guy downstream who's taking that air, who's breathing that air, who's drinking that water. Do you want that? I can't imagine that anybody would, a Republican, Democrat, or independent. Nobody wants to drink or breathe that stuff. So I think that there's I think that there's a kind of a political mantra that says let's deregulate, but on the other hand, when you start thinking about what the effect of that deregulation is, nobody really wants that.
Our guest is Joel Burcat. He is the gold medal award-winning author of his latest book, Strange Fire, reader's favorite gold medal award winner. The trilogy of books are environmental legal thrillers, Drink to Every Beast, A Mid-Rage, and Strange Fire. And they're available through September 7th. Nice Labor Day special from the publisher, Headline Books. You can get each of them for just 99 cents as an ebook at Amazon.com. again through September 7th. John Grisham very famously wrote and continues to write legal thrillers. You write these environmental legal thrillers. And now you're kind of, as an award winner, you're right there with Daniel Baldacci and the John Grishams of the world that write these books. Michael Connolly writes The Lincoln Lawyer. Could you write these books if you didn't know what you know? I mean, can this stuff be made up, or is this the culmination of your life's work and then you make it interesting and sexy for the reader?
Well, let me say that I think that a good writer should be able to do research and should be able to research these things. But one of the things that I bring to my environmental legal thrillers is really a lifetime of experience and a lifetime of understanding the lingo and understanding what's really going on behind the scenes. And I used to work with some very, very talented criminal lawyers. And I was not a criminal lawyer. I got involved helping out on environmental criminal issues from time to time. But I'll never forget a meeting I went to with a guy who had been a former assistant U.S. attorney. He's now a judge, actually. And we were meeting with somebody in the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. It was over an environmental issue. And I watched the two of them as they were negotiating. And there were some head nods that went on. I mean, it was like, what do you think about X? Head nod. And then the Deputy Attorney General said, I can consider that. Head nod back. And it was like, what's going on here? And when I talked with them later on, when I talked with my colleague later on, he said, oh yeah, he said, well, we speak the same language. There's certain things we say, certain things we don't say. And there's just head nods that take place. And I'm exaggerating a lot, actually, but it's the things that aren't said that you have to live to be able to understand them. So anybody can write a book, for example, about the President of the United States. There's only one author that I know of who's written fiction about being the President of the United States. That's Bill Clinton. He's written 2 books with Patterson. And I suspect that Patterson wrote most of it and probably overwrote a lot of what former President Clinton wrote. But there have been many, many fictional accounts of presidents over the years. And so you don't have to be the President of the United States to write a fictional book about the president. But I think that there's a certain authenticity that comes to these books when you have somebody who's involved in it. So for example, that's the reason why you find that there are many people who are involved in law enforcement who write legal books, or I should say books about police and detectives and the like. Or you find a Michael Connolly, for example, who's a journalist, but his beat was the legal beat in Los Angeles. And so he really got a firsthand knowledge. He saw those courtroom battles and he was involved in it, so that when he started writing the Lincoln Lawyer series, he absolutely understood what was going on in the courtroom. And other people too who are who come from those areas. We talked about Michael Crichton before, and he wrote a number of books before his passing that involved the medical establishment, and he of course was an MD. And I know a number of very, very fine writers who are medical doctors, and others who were lawyers or former lawyers, others who were cops, and had a very interesting conversation with a guy who's a former Secret Service agent, and he's writing a book about a Secret Service agent involved in some activity having to do with the President of the United States. So there's a certain authenticity, those head nods, those winks that take place that the rest of the world wouldn't pick up on, that wouldn't even necessarily be written in a textbook somewhere. But if you live it, you understand it. And that's one of the things that I think I try to bring to my books.
You're a retired attorney. Now you're writing full time. Which one's more fun?
Oh, more fun? On a day-to-day basis, for me, the writing is definitely more fun. There were times as an environmental lawyer that I had great fun doing some of the things that I did. And, whether that was in a courtroom, examining a witness, cross-examining a witness, I visited many, many strip mines. I visited an underground mine. I visited a number of fracking sites. I visited dozens of different kinds of industrial facilities over the years, and they were all fascinating and interesting. And there were times that I said to myself, I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this.
Right.
But it was fun, and I enjoyed doing it. But you remember that boring part that I told you about? So if the boring part is like this, and then the exciting fun part might be like that. So that's that was the thing with being a lawyer, is that there was a lot of non-exciting, non-fun parts. But
Good
I
that you
very
left
much
all that
enjoyed.
out of the books. You just leave all that out. You don't need books.
I allude to it, but the fact of the matter is, as a writer, there are a lot of not fun parts as well. Right now, I'm editing a book that I wrote, and it's tedious. I mean, it's looking for commas. It's looking to you're saying, okay, I'm using this word. Can I use a better word? And that can be tedious trying to figure that out. And it's very, very slow moving. I'm working on it right now. I've got a draft of the book here. I'm probably about halfway through the editing part, and it's taken weeks so far just to get through the editing part. And when I'm done editing, I'm going to go back and edit it again. So it'll be easily the fourth or fifth time that I've edited the book to get it to the point where I now think that it's presentable. So, I mean, that to me is not the most fun. The most fun thing to me as a writer is being creative and having these characters actually talk to me. I wake up sometimes and Mike Jacobs has been talking to me for hours in my sleep, and I'll get up and I'll just run up to my writing room here on the third floor of our house, and I'll just write down what he said or some other character, or I have a little notebook that I keep by the side of my bed, and I'll scribble out the things that I was dreaming about. So to me, that's great fun. It's all fun, and I enjoy doing that part. That the creative part to me is 100% fun all the time. The business part, the marketing part, all of that can be enjoyable at times, but it's not nearly as much fun as the writing part.
I got to tell you though, if characters in your book start talking to you too much, there's probably a medication you can take for that that'll help that get better. Joel Burcat is our
Every
guest.
writer,
Yeah.
Every writer I know says exactly the same thing. And what you really have to worry about are the ones who write horror and murder stories, because
No
you say to
kidding.
yourself, where is that dark stuff? Where did Hannibal Lecter actually come from? How dark a mind do you really have to come up with, dream up a cannibalistic psychiatrist? I mean, that you need to have a dark mind to do that. But
Point taken. That's a little too much spicy food in that guy's meal. Hey, well, that brings me to a good point, though. So clearly you do a ton of research for these books. You know some of the environmental law. You can't know it all. But do you ever get in there and just as a plot device, you go, you know what? Nobody's looking. I'm going to make this up because nobody's going to know but me. So do you ever make stuff up just to make it really interesting and fun to read?
I make up lots of stuff in my stories, but not the science and technical stuff.
Is that right?
I mean,
Okay.
I'm very, very careful on that, because there's always somebody reading my stories who's going to send me an email or post something up on Amazon, on an Amazon review, or post something on a chat room somewhere, and I'll find out about it. And you talk to writers. I mean, I don't generally have too many guns in my stories, but you talk to writers who do a lot of police work, or write about police, or write about detectives, or they write about murder mysteries or whatever. And they're very, very conscious of getting their guns right and understanding which guns do and which guns do not have a safety. Because woe unto you if you describe somebody releasing the safety on the wrong kind of a gun, or releasing it differently, and that gun does not have a safety, and they'll hear about it, because you don't just hear about it once, but 6 months later, when somebody else picks up the book and reads it and says, oh, he screwed up the gun part, they'll write about it again, and 6 years later, and so you're still hearing about it. In Drink to Every Beast, I actually wrote part of that story a long time ago, before the Houston Astros changed leagues, and I didn't change that up. And so somebody pointed out to me that I had the Houston Astros in the wrong league. So people watch and people read, and very, very knowledgeable readers out there will know this kind of stuff. I don't know how people write historical fiction, for example, because although the fiction part is fiction, they're stringing together a lot of history, and I admire those guys a lot. The Steve Berrys and now Lisa Scottolini, who's gotten into writing historical fiction, but all the people who write historical fiction, there's so much that they've got to get right. And when you talk to these writers, they just tell you about all the times that they've been called out because they got something wrong, some detail wrong, that something's wrong with the outfit that somebody's wearing. Oh, they didn't wear those in the 18th century. That wasn't until the 19th century. So whatever it might be, you can do all the making up that you want in terms of relationships between people and what people might say, but you got to be very, very careful on the factual details.
Joel Burcat's trio of legal thrillers, the Mike Jacobs trilogy, available each book for 99 cents as an ebook through September 7th, a great Labor Day read or 3 from Amazon.com and Headline Books. One last question for folks who are not familiar with your work. They've never read you before, and they go, you know what, this environmental stuff, I'd frankly rather watch paint dry. This does not sound like my thing. What would you tell them that might change their mind about picking up a Mike Jacobs legal thriller that you've written?
I would tell them to drink to every beast if they have never read any of my books and start reading that, because it's a lot of action at the beginning of the story. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's teenagers who are going down the Susquehanna River in a canoe who get themselves immersed in toxic waste, and the aftermath of what happens to those people, or the beginning of mid-rage when you have these psychotic mine operators who are doing some awful things to a mine inspector, or the beginning of Strange Fire, where you find out that somebody in the woods is shooting at a production area of a hydraulic fracturing site, and these are exciting books. I've been told that my books are very the term in the industry is filmic or cinematic, and I've been told that my books really are very much that. So you can picture what's going on as you're reading these stories, and there is also a very, very accomplished narrator who narrates amid rage in the audible version of my book. A man named I think it was Burke Allen who narrated amid rage.
Love that guy. I love that guy.
and that's an exciting way. If you're traveling somewhere and you've got you're going on vacation, you're going to spend the next 3-4 hours in the car, and you want to listen to one of my books. That one we've tried out to see how that's going to work, and it's a great listen and read.
Oh, thank you, my friend. It was fun to do. Amid Rage, one of the Mike Jacobs books in Joel Burcat's canon of literature, including Drink to Every Beast and Strange Fire, the trilogy of environmental legal thrillers. Hey, congratulations on winning the gold medal from Reader's Favorite. That's fantastic.
Thank you. My publisher, Kathy Teets, just sprung that on me as she was introducing me. So I learned it when everybody else did. So I'm very excited about that, very proud of that. And, I thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That's award-winning author Joel Burcat, our guest today on the Big Time Talker podcast, brought to you by SpeakerMatch.com and our friends at Headline Books, who co-sponsor Zoom into Books. Thank you so much for listening. And for those of you who watched online, thanks for watching as well. For author Joel Burcat, I'm Burke Allen. Thanks for being here. Now go out there and make it a great day. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.